They gave me a desk job after the incident on Kepler 7. That's what they call it. The incident. Like the word is a lid pressed down hard over something that still moves underneath it. Like if you name it small enough, it stays small. I've been filing observation reports for 11 months now, dry, procedural, the kind of language designed to sand the feeling off everything, and I have not once put down what I actually saw. Until now. This is not an official report. This is the story of a woman named Mara Voss, on a dying colony station on the edge of a system nobody had bothered to name yet, in the worst winter the terraformers had ever miscalculated. It is the story of the 3 weeks she spent alone. Truly alone, the kind of alone that stops being a condition and starts being a presence, something that breathes in the room with you, that watches you from the dark. And it is the story of the man who walked out of that dark. I keep telling myself I'm writing this for the record. For the archive. For posterity or science or whatever word makes the act feel useful. But, the truth? The truth is I cannot stop seeing her face the moment she realized she was not alone anymore, and I need to understand what that expression was. I've catalogued 11 sentient species. I have seen grief, joy, terror, relief. What was on her face was none of those things. It was older than all of them. And it ruined me, a little. In the way that some things ruin you and you find, after the dust settles, that you are glad to be ruined. This is the story of what happened. All 3 parts of it. The colony station was called Vashti 9, and it had been dying for 6 weeks before anyone in my division realized it. That is not an excuse. It is a fact I have turned over like a stone in my hands every day since, looking at the underside of it. Looking at what lives there. I had been assigned to the outer monitoring sector not because I was qualified, but because I was available, which in the bureaucratic language of the Interstellar Observation Corps means the same thing. My supervisor, a narrow-faced administrator named Chauvin, had handed me a dossier the thickness of a single thumb and told me to keep an eye on the Vashti cluster. He had the air of someone assigning someone else to water a plant they expected to die. Vashti 9 was not supposed to be inhabited anymore. The terraforming project had stalled, funding redirected, engineers reassigned, the whole colony apparatus mothballed 2 years ago pending review. The 53 settlers who'd been there were evacuated. Compensation packages. New housing vouchers. The quiet, clean language of institutional erasure. Except not all of them left. Her file was 2 pages. That's all. 2 pages for a human life, which I have since come to understand is both an administrative failure and a kind of poetry. The name, Mara Voss. Age, 34. Occupation listed as agricultural systems technician, retained contractor. Which meant she'd been hired by whoever inherited the terraforming contract to stay and keep the systems alive, the CO2 processors, the soil microbe stations, the water cycling until the next team arrived. The next team had been delayed. And then, delayed again. And then, the storm came. I accessed the station's external sensor feeds 3 hours after the storm system hit. This is what I saw, a thermal signature. 1. Moving slowly through the interior of a structure roughly the size of a large warehouse, located in grid sector 4 Bravo of the terraform zone. Outside, wind readings that made my instruments argue with each other. Temperature, -49 Celsius and still dropping. The greenhouse dome, which had been protecting the agricultural quadrant, had lost 30% of its integrity panels in the first hour. The communications relay was gone, sheared clean at the mount, tumbling somewhere over the polar ice shelf. 1 thermal signature. Moving. Then, stopping. Then, moving again. I opened a secondary feed and found the station's internal diagnostic log. It was being updated manually, in real time, by whoever that thermal signature was. I know now that humans do this, keep logs when no one is listening, when the logging itself is the act of insisting on their own existence. At the time I thought it was strange. Functional. Maybe even hopeful. The first entry read, Day 1 of Calm's blackout. Storm outside looks bad. The main relay mount is gone, I saw it go from the east window. Nothing I can do about that. Backup transmitter has maybe 2 days of power, and I'm not wasting it screaming into static. Dome's patching is holding at 70%. I have food for 60 days if I stretch it. The heaters in the main bay are running at 60% efficiency since the east coil burned out last month, which nobody fixed because nobody thought we'd need it in a season of reduced precipitation, which is what the weather model said, and I would like at this time to formally note that the weather model can go to hell. That last sentence made something shift in my chest cavity that I could not name and still cannot name with any precision. I have since cross-referenced it with human behavioral literature, and the closest I can get is the sensation of recognizing something you did not know you were looking for. I flagged the situation for escalation. The escalation protocol said, estimated response window, 14 to 21 days. I stared at that number for a long time. Her name was Mara, and she had been alone before. That much I could read between the lines of the 2-page file, not explicitly stated, not explained, but embedded in the facts the way water embeds itself in stone. She had signed on for the Vashti project as a single-person contractor. Emergency contact listed, none. Personal effects shipped to storage rather than a forwarding address. The kind of paperwork that, when you know how to read it, says, I have arranged my life so that leaving it would be convenient for everyone. I did not know how to read it then. I've learned since. What I watched over the next 72 hours was a masterclass in what I can only call structured refusal. Mara Voss did not panic. She did not break down. She assessed. She made lists. She moved through the station with a headlamp strapped to her forehead and a tablet in her hand, going room to room like she was taking inventory of her own will, shelf by shelf. She patched 2 dome panels with spare polyfiber resin, working in gloves so thick she had to redo each clamp 3 times. She rerouted power from the non-essential quarters to the agricultural bay, which meant her personal bunk area dropped to 9 degrees Celsius. She started sleeping in her work coat and thermal underlayer in the nutrient processing room, because it was the warmest enclosed space that still had a functioning door. Her log entries were factual. Spare. The handwriting of someone who had trained themselves to see only what was useful to see. Day 3. Dome integrity holding at 68%. East side drifting snow is compressing against the outer wall. I'm going to have to deal with that before it becomes structural. Moved the seedling trays to the center bay. Lost 6 trays of early grain from the temperature drop, but the legumes are hanging on. The legumes are always hanging on. If I survive this, I'm starting a religion around legumes. Day 5, the silence is the part that's hardest to explain. It's not just the absence of sound, everything outside is actually very loud. The wind doesn't stop. It's more that the silence is directional? Like it's aimed at me. Like it knows I'm the only thing here to receive it. I read that entry 4 times. I sent my second escalation. This one I flagged as urgent. The system acknowledged it with an automated response and bumped my estimated response window to 16 to 23 days. 16 to 23 days. She had 2 days of backup transmitter power left. I sat in my monitoring station with that number in front of me and felt something I was not supposed to feel. Something outside my operational parameters. I had been told, in training, that emotional investment in monitored subjects was a contamination risk. It distorted reporting, introduced bias, compromised objectivity. What I felt was not investment. It was something more like vertigo. The specific vertigo of watching something happen and holding the precise instruments to measure it and being entirely, architecturally unable to stop it. She lost the transmitter on day 6. The backup unit's power cell failed 4 hours earlier than she'd projected. She was in the middle of a diagnostic when it went. I could see from the logs that she'd been trying to boost the signal, trying to punch through the storm's interference. The last automated ping from the transmitter was at 3:14 station time. After that, I had only the internal diagnostics. The sensors. The thermal signature. And the log. She kept writing it. Even after the transmitter was gone. Even knowing no one could receive it. She wrote it in the station's local system, a closed loop talking to itself in the dark, and I didn't understand why until much later, until a human colleague explained it to me, much later, in the way you explain something to a child who is not a child but has simply never been taught this particular thing. She was keeping herself company, he said. When you're alone and scared, the sound of your own voice, even written, is the proof that you still exist. Day 7, I've been thinking about the legumes a lot. Not in a religious way yet. More in a, I wonder if they're scared way. Which is a stupid thing to wonder. They don't have nervous systems. They can't be scared. But they're growing in the dark right now, in the cold, putting out these tiny white root threads into soil that's at the absolute minimum temperature for germination, and something about that feels, I don't know, companionable. Like we're both just trying to make it to spring. Day 9, East drift wall is getting bad. I'm going to have to go outside tomorrow and clear it manually or it'll start pressing on the foundation joints. Outside is currently -51. My suit's rated to -45. I've done the math 6 different ways. The math says don't go outside. I'm going to go outside. I want to stop here and explain what I felt reading that entry because I think it matters, for the record. I want to be precise about it. It was not admiration. Admiration is what you feel when someone does something you understand. This was something else, more disoriented, more personal. The math said one thing. She had done the math herself, acknowledged it, and was going to go outside anyway. Not from stupidity. Not from desperation. From a decision, quiet and lucid and terrible, that the thing the math said didn't matter was worth the risk of the math being right. I have a word for that now. I didn't then. The word is stubborn. But not the small kind. She went outside on day 10. I tracked her through the exterior thermal sensors, a small moving heat signature against the frozen waste, ludicrous and brave, wearing a suit rated for 45 below and working in 51 below with the hand tools she had, which were not designed for this, which were agricultural tools repurposed by necessity and sheer bloody-mindedness. She worked for 2 hours and 40 minutes. I watched the suit's exterior temperature readings creep upward on my monitor, her body heat trying to compensate, losing the argument. She got the drift wall cleared. 80% of it. The final section she couldn't reach. She came back inside. The log entry that day was 3 words, got most of it. I don't know why those 3 words hit me like they did. Like a door closing in a quiet house. Like the sound of someone deciding, quietly, that most of it was enough. Day 12. Day 13. The storm didn't break. The dome held at 64% and stopped dropping. The legumes survived. She started rationing her meal packs more aggressively, not from shortage, exactly, but from a kind of psychological need to give herself control over something, to have a choice she was making rather than one being made for her. Day 14, the entry read, I've been trying to remember if I told anyone where I was. Not in a rescue way. Just philosophically. Does anyone have a specific picture of me in their head right now? Not a general Mara exists somewhere picture, but a specific one? A Tuesday afternoon picture, or a she's probably eating something picture? I think the answer is no. I think if I disappeared, the shape of my absence would be very small. And I'm trying to decide if that's sad or if it's just a fact, and I keep coming down on the side of just a fact, but tonight for some reason it feels sad. I flagged that entry. I don't know what I flagged it for. There was no protocol for it. I just flagged it. Marked it. The way you put a stone on top of a grave. Day 16. Something in the east heating coil gave out entirely, the one she'd been nursing alone. Temperature in the main bay dropped to 4 degrees Celsius. Day 17. She moved everything into the nutrient processing room, every seedling tray, every food pack, her sleeping materials, her tools, the broken down shell of the secondary transmitter she'd been trying to salvage. Arranged her entire survival into one room, tightened, organized, the way you pack a wound. The log that night, I keep thinking about this thing my father used to say. He wasn't a particularly warm person. But he had this phrase he used whenever things went bad. He'd say, "Get small. Get still. Wait for the angle." I used to hate it. It felt like giving up dressed up as strategy. Now I think, maybe that's all this is. Getting small. Getting still. Waiting for the angle. The angle has to come. They have to notice eventually that the ping stopped. They have to. She paused in the writing. I could see it, the timestamp gap in the log was 4 minutes and 22 seconds long. Then, they have to. On day 19, the storm broke. Not all at once. It thinned first, winds dropping from 200 kilometers per hour to 140, then to 90, then to something survivable. The cloud cover thinned and, for the first time in nearly 3 weeks, the station's external sensors picked up solar input. Small. Real. Her log entry that morning was a single line, "There is light coming through the dome panels." And, then, nothing for 6 hours. I think she slept. I think she slept for the first time in 19 days in a way that was not just unconsciousness but actual, human, embodied rest, the kind where the body decides it is safe to let go for a little while. I watched the thermal signature go still in the center of the nutrient processing room, and I felt, this is difficult to admit, in an official record, but I am committed to accuracy, I felt something very close to relief. Not because the crisis was over. The crisis was not over. She had no communications. No confirmed rescue. The dome was at 64% and the eastern coil was gone and the temperature differential outside was still lethal to unprotected skin. But she had slept. Like she had decided, at some point in the dark, that she was worth the unconsciousness. That felt important. That still feels important. I sent my third escalation on day 19. I sent it directly to the division commander, bypassing the automated protocol chain, which is a violation of standard operating procedure for which I was later formally reprimanded. I included the full log archive. Every entry. I attached a note that was not in the official reporting format and that I will reproduce here in full. Sir, this is Monitoring Analyst Zalketh, Outer Sector Unit 7. The subject in this report has been alone and without communications for 13 days. She has maintained structural integrity of a failing facility in -50 conditions using tools rated for agricultural use. She has been writing a log that no one can receive. She is, by any metric I have access to, still alive and still functioning and does not know whether anyone is coming. I am requesting emergency priority dispatch. Not because her situation has crossed a new threshold of physical danger. Because she wrote they have to and there was a 4-minute pause between those words and the next ones, and I think she was deciding something in that pause. I think what she was deciding matters. I am requesting dispatch. Please respond. The commander responded in 40 minutes. The dispatch was authorized. Estimated arrival, 36 to 48 hours. I opened the diagnostic feed and watched the thermal signature in the nutrient processing room, still and small and radiating its quiet proof of existence into the dark. They have to. 48 hours. I didn't tell her. I couldn't, no communications. She couldn't know. All I could do was watch the sensor feeds and update my log and wait, same as her, on opposite sides of a distance I couldn't cross. Day 20. She was back to work. The seedlings. The dome. The slow mechanical maintenance of staying alive. She found a panel joint on the west side that had started to separate and spent 4 hours in the cold patching it, her thermal suit doing its inadequate best against the residual chill of the broken storm. Her log that evening, patch is holding. West Dome section is going to make it. I think. The legumes are doing something I can only describe as thriving, which seems unfair given the general situation, but I'm choosing to see it as solidarity. Go, legumes. You weird, tenacious little idiots. You beautiful, stubborn things. I read that 3 times and I felt something that I think might have been joy, but smaller, the quiet kind. The kind that fits in the space between one sentence and the next. Day 21. She repaired the secondary transmitter. Not completely, she didn't have the right components, but enough to get it to a low-power broadcast state. It wouldn't reach anyone. But she turned it on. The log transmitter is running at 12% capacity and broadcasting on all civilian emergency frequencies. It probably won't reach anything. But it's talking, and talking is something. This is Mara Voss at Vashti 9 Agricultural Station, if anyone's listening. This is me saying I'm here. I'm here. I'm still here. I was listening. Across 140,000 kilometers of monitored space, in my monitoring station with my bad coffee and my escalation reports and my unauthorized emotional investment, I heard her. I'm still here. The dispatch ship entered the system on day 22, 14 hours ahead of schedule. And, on day 22, at approximately 14:30 station time, Mara Voss heard something she had not heard in 22 days, a sound from outside that was not the wind. The log entry is the last one from the blackout period. It is 4 words. She wrote, "Someone is out there." And then, I can see it in the timestamp, she stopped writing. For 11 minutes, she stopped. And then, she went to the door. The dispatch ship was called the Meridian Cross, and it had been assigned to the Vashti cluster run because it happened to be nearest and because the crew happened to be available, which I have noted is how most of the important things in the universe get assigned. I pulled the crew manifest the moment it entered my sensor range. 4 crew members. Pilot, co-pilot, a medic named Dr. Sen Okora, and the operations specialist, the one who'd actually go into the station, who'd be first contact, who'd be the person that Mara Voss would see when she opened that door. His name was Elias Cord. Designation, Operations and Recovery Specialist, Tier 3. Prior deployments, 11. Species contact experience, extensive. Personal notes in file, sparse. A photograph in the record showed a man in his early 50s, wide-shouldered, wearing the kind of expression that looked like it had been worn so long it had become structural, not stern exactly, not distant, but settled, the way old wood settles, the way a thing settles when it has decided it is done moving. He was wearing a hat in the photograph. I would like to note that officially for the record, because the hat becomes important. It was a battered, wide-brimmed thing, the kind associated with a particular region of Earth's North American continent in the 19th and early 20th centuries. A cowboy hat, per my cultural database. The file listed it under personal effects, with a note from a previous mission supervisor that read, "Cord refuses to remove the hat on external approaches. States it's practical. Not worth the argument." I would not understand the significance of that hat until later. The Meridian Cross set down 2 kilometers from the station, the nearest stable ground the storm had left. Standard approach in deteriorated terrain conditions. Which meant Elias Cord had to walk 2 kilometers. In the aftermath of a system-wide storm that had dropped temperatures to -51 and left the landscape looking like something that had been arguing with gravity for 3 weeks and, finally, won. He did this in a full environmental suit except for the hat, which he wore over the suit's hood, which I can only imagine looked bizarre and which I would have paid considerable professional resources to see. I tracked him on the external sensors. He moved unhurried. Methodical. Stopped twice, once to check his navigation reading, once to examine something on the ground that my sensors couldn't resolve, something he crouched over for 30 seconds before standing and moving on. He had the walk of someone who had been in enough bad places that this particular bad place had been filed into a category called manageable and left there. The station airlock was on the south face. He reached it at 14:28. He did not knock, which I want to note. He pressed the external calm, the local hardline, still functional, and said, in a voice that matched his photograph, unhurried, slightly rough, the acoustic texture of someone who had done a lot of talking into empty rooms, "Vashti 9 Station, this is Operations Specialist Cord with the Meridian Cross. We received your emergency signal relay 14 hours ago. I'm outside your south airlock. No rush. Take your time. No rush. Take your time." I have since asked several humans what that phrasing means, whether it was procedural language, a training script, some kind of first contact protocol. Every single one of them said no. They said it was just something you say to someone who has been scared for a long time, to let them know the scared part is over and the next part can move at whatever speed they can manage. None of them could explain how he knew. He'd read nothing about her except the file, 2 pages, same as me. He had no data on her psychological state, no log access, no 22 days of sensor feeds telling him what the silence had cost her. He just knew. She opened the door. I want to be precise about this, because I have replayed the sensor data many times and the precision feels important. She did not fling it open. She did not stumble out. She opened it the way you open something when your hands are not entirely sure what they're doing, yet carefully, the way you handle something fragile, the way you handle yourself when you've been holding yourself together so long that the act of letting go feels dangerous. The external sensors showed 2 thermal signatures at the south airlock. Hers, small, slightly erratic, the telltale heat pattern of someone who had been running on cortisol and willpower for 3 weeks. His, steady. Wide. The heat signature of someone who had dressed properly and moved well and was not afraid of the cold. The internal mic caught ambient audio. I have the transcript. Maravas, at 14 hours 31 minutes and 4 seconds, you're real. Not a question. Elias Cord, at 14 hours 31 minutes and 7 seconds, yep. Maravas, at 14 hours 31 minutes and 14 seconds, your hat. Elias Cord, at 14 hours 31 minutes and 17 seconds, what about it? Maravas, at 14 hours 31 minutes and 22 seconds, I was expecting something more official looking. Elias Cord, at 14 hours 31 minutes and 28 seconds, I'm the most official thing you're going to see for the next 24 hours, so you might want to recalibrate your expectations. Can I come in? 7 seconds of silence. Maravas, at 14 hours 31 minutes and 41 seconds, yeah. I have read many first contact transcripts. I have documented encounters between species who shared no language, no biology, no frame of reference for what the other was. I have filed reports on meetings that required 3 months of translator calibration before a single sentence could pass between parties without catastrophic misinterpretation. None of them moved me the way that transcript did. Your hat. I was expecting something more official looking. She had been alone for 22 days. 22 days of silence and cold and the specific, crushing weight of not knowing if anyone was coming. And, when the door opened and the person was there, real, solid, external proof that the world beyond her station still existed and still included her in it, the first thing her brain reached for was the hat. The hat. My human colleague, when I told him this, laughed. Long and warm and a little like he was laughing at himself rather than the story. He said, that's the brain trying to normalize something overwhelming. You grab onto the smallest, safest, most manageable detail you can find. The hat was something she could process. Everything else was too big. I thought about her log entry. Getting small. Getting still. Even in the moment of rescue, she was still doing it. Getting small. Getting still. Processing the hat before she could process what the hat meant. I want to tell you about Elias Cord now, because he is half of this story and I have been treating him like context rather than character, which is unfair to both him and to what happened. His file was sparse, as I said. What it contained was 11 deployments, each one on the outer edge of settled space, each one the kind of work that doesn't make news. Retrieval operations. Station emergencies. Isolated facility check-ins that turned into something more complicated. The kind of assignments that filter toward people who are good at being the first thing a frightened person sees and making that frightening thing slightly less frightening. He'd grown up, according to the personnel background section, in a place called West Texas. A region of dry, flat earth and enormous sky on a planet called Earth, which is the origin world of the humans and which I have researched extensively since and which sounds alternately beautiful and brutal in a way that I think explains quite a lot about the humans who come from it. He'd worked land as a young man. Before the space programs expanded their contractor reach into civilian specialists, before operations work became a viable career path for someone with his particular skill set, he'd worked on cattle ranches, managed terrain, managed animals, managed the particular loneliness of large empty spaces and the machinery required to keep things alive in them. He'd never really left that work, I think. He'd just changed the scale. There was one other note in his file. A commendation from a mission 4 years prior, in a post-storm emergency on a mining platform. The commending officer had written, "Cord has an unusual capacity to communicate stability to people in crisis. He does not perform calm. He produces it, somehow, in the people around him. I have no better way to describe this. He does not perform calm. He produces it." I've been thinking about that distinction for a long time. The next 14 hours I monitored through the internal feeds. She showed him the station. He did not perform an inspection, he let her show him, let her lead, let her be the expert on her own survival and her own space. He asked questions that weren't really questions, the kind that invite description rather than requiring it. What's the dome integrity like on the west face? How'd you manage the east coil? Those legumes give you any trouble in the temperature drop? She talked. She talked in the way people talk when they have been holding every sentence inside themselves with no one to give it to, not frantic, not tearful, but steady and slightly too detailed, the way water moves when a dam cracks rather than breaks. She told him about the drift wall. She told him about the polyfiber patches, showed him each one like evidence. She told him about the transmitter repair, the 14% broadcast, the frequencies she'd been calling into. He looked at the transmitter for a long time. Then, he said, "That's how we found you." That signal was bouncing off 3 weather satellites and coming in at about 4% of original power. Signal analyst almost filed it as interference noise. She was quiet for a moment. But they didn't. No. They didn't. Another quiet. "Good analyst." "Yeah," he said. "Good analyst." He did not look at her directly when he said it. He was still looking at the transmitter. I think he was giving her the space to feel what she needed to feel without an audience. I think that was intentional. I think most things Elias Cord did were intentional in ways that looked accidental, and I think that's what the commending officer meant by producing calm rather than performing it. She made him eat with her that night. Not a formal thing, she just set out 2 meal packs on the workbench where she'd been eating for 3 weeks and handed him one and said, "You probably had worse on the ship, but this is what I've got," and he said, "I definitely had worse," and they ate. I have been in monitoring operations for 3 years. I have watched hundreds of human interactions, formal debriefs, crisis interventions, first contact procedures with my own species and others. I do not know what to say about those 2 people eating reconstituted food on a workbench in a 9-degree room at the edge of everything, except that it looked more real than most of the things I have been paid to observe. She told him about the legumes. About the religion she'd been planning. He asked what the tenets were. She thought about it. Mostly just keep going. Root into whatever you have. Find something small to care about and care about it until it's enough. He was quiet in a way that wasn't empty. The way things are quiet when something is settling. "That's a pretty good religion," he said. "Thank you. I'm the founder and, so far, the only congregation. Congregations are overrated." She laughed. It was the first time in the audio logs that she had laughed, and it was a startled sound, not the laugh of someone who found something funny but of someone who had forgotten, for 22 days, that funny was a thing that could happen to them. The thermal signatures on my monitor were side by side. I found myself leaning forward in my chair, which is not behavior that serves any operational function, and I did it anyway. Late that night, the internal clock read 2:17, she was awake. He was asleep in the makeshift sleeping area she'd cleared for him. Her thermal signature was in the agricultural bay, among the legume trays. She sat there for 40 minutes and I couldn't see what she was doing. The agricultural bay sensors were low resolution, but the log entry she made at 2:58 told me, "I went to see the legumes." I don't know why exactly. I think I wanted to show them that it worked out. Which is insane, because they don't have nervous systems, I've established this. But, I wanted them to know. He asked about the religion. He asked like it was a real thing to ask about. Like the answer mattered. I have not had many people in my life who asked questions like that. The kind that make you think about what you actually believe instead of what you're supposed to believe. He's asleep in the other room. There's someone asleep in the other room. I keep saying it over in my head because it doesn't feel real yet. For 22 days the station was mine and only mine, it was something. I don't have a good word for what it was. Not entirely bad. But tonight the weight of it arrived all at once, the way cold does sometimes, hitting you not in the moment but hours later when you think you're warm. I cried a little bit. In the agricultural bay. In front of the legumes. I think they understood. She paused. The timestamp gap was 2 minutes this time. I think that's okay. The next morning, the medic arrived from the Meridian Cross to do the full health assessment. Dr. Okora was efficient, warm in a clinical way, professional. She documented everything: dehydration markers, mild frostbite on 3 fingers of the right hand, muscle fatigue consistent with extended physical exertion in extreme conditions, a bruise on her left shoulder she couldn't account for. All survivable. All documentation. Cord stood at the edge of the room during the assessment. Not hovering. Just present. The way a load-bearing wall is present, you don't think about it unless it's gone. When Okora finished and stepped out to transmit the report, Mara sat on the edge of the workbench and looked at her hands. The 3 frostbitten fingers. She flexed them slowly, testing the sensation. Cord said, "They'll heal." I know. A pause. The weather model said no extreme precipitation this season. Weather models are wrong all the time. Yeah. She looked up at him. You do this a lot? Go get people? Yep. Do they usually? She stopped. Tried again. What's usually the worst part? For them. He thought about it. He did not reach for an easy answer, which I noticed. He picked up his hat from the workbench and looked at it. Usually, he said slowly, it's the transition. When the emergency ends. Most people, they hold themselves together so good through the hard part. It's after that gets them. When they stop having to hold on and there's nothing to hold on to. She nodded. What happens after that, she said. To them. He put the hat back on. Mostly they're okay, he said. Mostly they find out they were tougher than they knew and that's a thing to have. Knowing that. She looked at him for a moment. And, the ones who aren't okay? I give them Dr. Okora's contact information and mine. And, I tell them that not being okay isn't the same as not being able to get through it. She nodded again. Slower this time. Can I ask you something? She said. Go ahead. The hat. You wear it outside? In -50? Keeps the wind off my face. Does it work? Mostly. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. That is the least satisfying answer I've ever received. I get that a lot. This time the laugh was real. Full. Involuntary. I watched the thermal signatures on my monitor, 2 small sources of heat in a cold room at the edge of a storm-beaten world, and I thought about the word companionable that she had used for the legumes on day 7, and I thought that I understood now what she meant. They departed Vashti 9 at 11 o'clock on day 23. She took 3 things: her personal tablet, the secondary transmitter components she'd salvaged, and a single legume seedling, a legume plant she'd transplanted into a nutrient tube, the hardiest one from the trays, the one that had been in the coldest spot and grown anyway. I watched the thermal signatures move toward the airlock. Watched the exterior sensor track 2 figures crossing the 2 kilometers back to the Meridian Cross in the thin pale light of the post-storm morning. They walked at the same pace. Side by side, not in a deliberate way, just in the way of 2 people whose bodies have negotiated a shared speed without anyone having to ask. Her log, the one she'd been writing into a closed loop for 22 days, had one final entry, timestamped at 10:47, 19 minutes before departure. Last entry from Vashti 9. The dome is at 64%, but it'll hold until the next team gets here. The legume trays are set to automated nutrition cycle. I've left a note in the station log about the east coil, the west panel joint, and the weather model situation, which I have described as fundamentally aspirational. I'm taking one legume with me. I know that's against the agricultural protocol. I'm filing it under personal effects. Someone asked me yesterday what the tenets of the religion were. I said, keep going, root into what you have, find something small to care about and care about it until it's enough. I think I need to add one more. Let someone in. End log. I was formally reprimanded for the unauthorized escalation on day 19. Chauvin delivered the reprimand in his office, which smelled of recycled air and administrative certainty, reading from a prepared statement that used phrases like procedural breach and compromised professional distance and violation of reporting chain hierarchy. He had the manner of someone who finds great peace in the existence of rules, because rules are a category of thing that do not require you to feel anything about them. I sat across from him and thought about 4 minutes and 22 seconds. I thought about they have to. I said, understood. I said, I'll follow protocol in future situations. I signed the form. He nodded with the satisfaction of a man who had resolved something. I left his office and went back to my monitoring station and pulled up the Meridian Cross Transit log and confirmed that Mara Voss had arrived at the Kepler 7 processing hub safely, that she had been medically cleared, that she had been assigned temporary quarters and offered a full psychological evaluation which she had accepted and scheduled for the following week. The legume plant, per the personal effects manifest, had arrived intact. I closed the file. And then, I sat there for a long time, in my monitoring station with its bad coffee and its 23 active sensor feeds and its ongoing, relentless flow of data from the outer reaches, and I tried to figure out what to do with the fact that I had been changed by this. That is not a comfortable thing to admit. Change implies you were wrong before, or at least incomplete, that something existed which your previous configuration could not contain. I had monitored 11 situations that reached escalation threshold in my 3 years. I had filed reports. I had been precise and efficient and professionally appropriate, and the people in those reports had been shapes on my sensor feeds, heat signatures with file numbers, problems that resolved or didn't and either way stopped being my problem once the dispatch ship arrived. Mara Voss was a heat signature with a file number. And she had written about the legumes like they were fellow travelers. She had calculated the math on going outside in -50 degrees, acknowledged the math was against her, and gone anyway. She had kept a log for a closed loop, talking to no one, because talking was proof that she existed. She had cried in the agricultural bay in front of plants that could not hear her. And, on the day she was rescued, she had noticed the hat. I couldn't put her back into the shape of a sensor feed. She had come out of the feed the way something comes out of water, wetter and more real and harder to handle. I requested the full audio transcripts from the Meridian Cross Transit. This was within protocol. Transit logs are standard observation material for assigned monitoring units. I told myself I was completing the file. I was thorough, that's all. It was thoroughness. The transcripts ran for 31 hours. I read all of them. Most of it was procedural: Dr. Okora's daily health checks, Mara's responses, the routine communications of a recovery transit. She slept more than 12 hours on the first day. Okora noted in her medical log, subject showing expected fatigue response to sustained crisis state. Sleep duration elevated. Recommend uninterrupted rest through first 24 hours of transit. Elias Cord's voice appeared in the transcripts at irregular intervals. Never pushing. Available when she surfaced. When she woke after the long first sleep and wandered into the ship's galley looking for water, he was there. They talked for 2 hours about nothing in particular, about West Texas, which she had never been to, about the way the sky there sat on you like a physical weight, about the quality of the silence in large flat places. She said, I used to hate silence. Before. He poured more water into her cup. And, now? A pause. It depends on whether it's aimed at you. He made a sound that acknowledged this without pressing it, and I thought about her log on day 5, the silence that was directional, that knew she was the only thing there to receive it. She had not explained that to him. He had not asked. He had received it exactly as she'd offered it, incomplete, compressed, the 2-word minimum for something that didn't have a proper word at all. He was good at receiving things that way. At accepting the compressed version without asking to unpack it. There is a skill in that. I have been trying to learn it since. I want to tell you what happened next, but I want to do it accurately, which means I have to tell you a different story first. I have a colleague. His name, his designation, technically, but I'll use name because I've learned that matters, is Funro. He monitors the inner transit lanes, which is a less interesting posting than mine but a significantly less emotionally destabilizing one, and he has been in the Corps for 12 years and has the even-keeled disposition of someone who has made a permanent peace with the distance between observation and participation. When I told him about the Vashti 9 case, about the unauthorized escalation, the reprimand, the thing I could not shake, he was quiet for a moment. Then, he said something I have been carrying since, "You got attached." That's what happened. You got attached, and the machine we work in doesn't have a protocol for that because it's supposed to not happen. But here's what I've noticed: after 12 years, the humans we observe who make the most significant choices, the ones that matter, that move the needle on whatever outcome was in question, they're almost always the ones who got attached to something. To an idea, a person, a tiny plant. Attachment is what makes them able to go outside in -50. It's the engine. And we're not supposed to run on that engine, but sometimes the engine runs anyway, and when it does, the question isn't how to stop it. The question is what to do with the fact that it happened. I said, "What do you do with it?" He said, "Write it down." So I'm writing it down. I applied for a fieldwork reassignment 3 months after the Vashti 9 incident. I want to be precise about what I mean by fieldwork reassignment. In the Corps, monitoring analysts stay in the monitoring stations. Fieldwork is for the operations specialists, the recovery teams, the Elias Cords of the organization who go into the cold in their impractical hats and knock on airlocks and say no rush, take your time. Monitoring analysts observe. It is built into the job description. It is, in many ways, the entire point. My application was reviewed by Chauvin, he denied it. He added a note to my file: Analyst Zalketh shows signs of professional boundary difficulty arising from prolonged single-subject monitoring. Recommends standard rotation to multi-stream observation to prevent recurrence. I read this note and thought about the reprimand and thought about what Funro had said and thought, with a clarity that surprised me, that Chauvin was not wrong about the facts and was entirely wrong about the problem. I had not developed a professional boundary difficulty. I had developed a professional question. The question was, what is the point of observation if it produces nothing in the observer? That is not a question the Corps has a form for. I understand that. I'm not naive about institutions or their requirements. But it is a real question, and it is mine, and I am keeping it. Mara Voss completed her psychological evaluation 2 weeks after returning. I know this because the evaluation outcome was filed in the standard recovery documentation, which I received as the assigned monitoring analyst, which is another thing the Corps does not have a form for, the thing where you have 23 days of intimacy with someone's inner life and, then, you receive their psychological assessment as a checkbox in a transit document. She was classified, recovered, functional, cleared for redeployment when desired. When desired. I wondered if she desired it. I wondered what she did with herself in the weeks after, with her temporary quarters and her legume plant and the hat she'd never forget and the religion with 4 tenets now. I wondered if the silence in her quarters was the kind that was aimed at you or the other kind. I could not ask. I was the monitor. She was the monitored. We occupied different sides of a line I had been standing on for 3 years and which had begun to feel, after Vashti 9, less like a professional boundary and more like a question of whether I was brave enough to cross it. I was not brave enough. I want to be honest about that. But I did something that was not quite brave and not quite nothing. I took the unauthorized note I had sent to the division commander, the one about the 4-minute pause and that they have to, and I sent a copy of it to the Meridian Cross through the standard crew communication channel, addressed to Operations Specialist Elias Cord, with a single line attached. For the record, if he'd like to have it, she wrote this at 2:47 on day 16, before she knew anyone was coming. I thought he should know what he was walking into. I attached the log entry. The one with the 4-minute gap. He responded in 6 hours. His message read, "Thanks." Figured it was something like that. Usually is. And then, after a pause, the timestamp told me the message had been composed in 2 stages. She doing okay? I checked the file. Cleared. Functional. Legume plant intact. I wrote back, yes. She added a 4th tenet to the religion. He wrote, "What is it?" I wrote, "Let someone in." He didn't respond for 20 minutes. I found myself watching the comm channel the way I'd watched the sensor feeds, waiting for the thermal signature to move. Then, good tenet. Then, tell me if she deploys somewhere else. If it's in your sector. I should have said, that would be a professional boundary issue. I should have said, I'll follow standard monitoring protocol. I should have said a lot of things that Chauvin would have approved of. I said, I will. 4 months later, she took a new posting. A terraforming support contract on a station in the outer Kepler corridor, a different project, a larger team this time, but still on the edge, still the kind of work that not everyone wants, and she had apparently decided she still did. The posting application in her file listed her reason for the deployment choice in a single line, and I have read that line so many times I have it in memory now. I know how to work alone. I want to find out what else I know how to do. I sent a notification to the Meridian Cross. Elias Cord was in the outer Kepler corridor on a separate posting. Different station. 2 hours transit. I don't know what happened after that. It's outside my assigned monitoring sector. I have no sensor feeds, no log access, no thermal signatures to track. The professional machine that I work inside has, for once, arranged things so that I genuinely cannot know. I'm choosing to believe that's okay. Here is what I have been turning over, in the months since the Vashti 9 case was closed. What I've been trying to name. I watched a woman survive 22 days of profound isolation through a combination of stubbornness, technical competence, and a relationship she developed with a tray of legumes. I watched her keep a log for a closed loop because the act of writing was the act of insisting. I watched her go outside in conditions the math said would kill her and come back and write got most of it and lie down and sleep. I watched a man walk 2 kilometers in the aftermath of a catastrophic storm with a battered hat over his environmental suit hood, and say no rush, take your time into an airlock calm, and produce calm in a frightened person the way you produce light, not by trying to produce it, but by being the kind of thing that does. I watched 2 people eat reconstituted food on a workbench in a 9-degree room and talk about weather models and hat practicality, and something in the quality of that exchange was I keep looking for the word and the word keeps not being big enough. Human is the word. Which is obvious. They were both human. But I don't mean it as a category. I mean it as a thing with texture and weight. A thing you can feel when it's near you. I mean, human the way the legumes are tenacious. The way silence can be aimed. The way the pause between they have to and the next sentence contains something that no instrument I have can measure, but that I know is there. The Corps gave me a new posting 6 months ago. Not fieldwork. Still a monitoring analyst, still a sensor feed, still coffee that is technically coffee in the way that weather models are technically accurate. But a different sector, with a rotation of short-term assignments rather than the long single-subject monitoring that Chauvin decided was professionally compromising. He's not wrong. Long single-subject monitoring is professionally compromising. I keep thinking about it anyway. I received one more communication related to the Vashti 9 case, 7 months after it closed. It was an automated update from the agricultural station's maintenance log. The system sends them quarterly to the last assigned monitoring analyst. Routine stuff, dome integrity, system status, the cold mechanical accounting of a place that has no one in it right now. At the bottom of the quarterly report, someone had added a non-automated note. A manual entry, which shouldn't have been possible through the maintenance system. It would have required local access, someone physically at the station. The update had gone in about 3 weeks prior. The note read, "Legumes in Bay 4 are doing well. Thought you should know." No name. No signature. No explanation for how someone got into the system, or why, or what they were doing at a mothballed agricultural station at the edge of a system nobody had bothered to name. I read it twice. And then, in my monitoring station with its bad coffee and its rotating sensor feeds, in my small, insufficient, professionally compromised way, I wrote back into the closed loop, knowing it wouldn't reach anyone, because by then, I understood why you do that.